First is Madam Priscilla Achakpa. And also to inform you that we're recording this meeting. I hope we're all fine with that. Please, in case you are not comfortable, just reach out to any of the hosts or co-hosts in case you're not comfortable with being recorded. So back to introducing the speakers. The first is Madam Priscilla Achakpa, who is the founder and global lead for the Women Environmental Program. We are the hosts of this, this webinar. And the second person is Zoneziwoh Wondieh. She's the executive director for Women for a Change. And we'll also have Syvia Diamon Dobor joining us. Syvia is a climate change practitioner from Liberia. Syvia is not here yet, but we're hoping that she can join us while the session is going on. So I'll just hand over now to Dr. Priscilla Achakpa for a very quick welcome remarks while we continue our conversation. Over to you, Priscilla.
Hi, good morning, everyone. For those of you that are in Nigeria, good morning. For those that are from other parts of the world, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you all here. And for us at WEP, this is a very critical moment for us as we prepare towards Conference of Parties 27, which is happening on the soil of Africa in Egypt in November. And so we went to Bonn. We had several discussions on the issues of African feminist convening on the soil of Africa. What are our demands? What are our positions? How can we create linkages, especially from the grassroots to the national, to the regional level? How can we bring the voices of the very grassroots people to the table at that level? And how can we build the capacities of African feminists to be able to strategically position themselves when it comes to the issues of climate change? How can we engage our negotiators? How can we engage with other stakeholders? How can we engage with the members of the parliament? How can we engage with our political leaders when it comes to the issues of climate change and gender inclusion? For us, we feel that this is a very critical moment, especially that the IPCC report, that is Intergovernmental Panel report on climate change, on precisely this year on the 28th of April, gave a kind of, February, gave a report that is so disturbing that the human capacity is going to diminish if we don't take the issues of climate change very seriously. So how do we address these issues? And when you look at the impact of climate change, it is mostly on women and of course the children. So for us, as African feminists, with the convening and of course preparation to Egypt, we strongly believe that this is an avenue for us to share insight as to what happened in Bonn with several feminists that convene, African feminists that convene there, but also the global feminists, because we cannot operate in a vacuum. We have to operate and share our desires and our aspirations for other feminists across the world. So we were in Bonn. We have several issues that were discussed, but of course, as the conversation continues, we will be able to shed more light because we have a lot of feminists that were there, and most of them are speakers here. So I welcome all of you. Please feel free to ask questions where it is necessary. We are open. And even after this event, you want to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. And on this note, I welcome all of you to this WEP Development Series, which is focusing on African feminist positions, but also demands towards COP27. Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priscilla. Please let's remember to put ourselves on mute so that we minimize the distractions. So yes, I can see more introductions coming in. Rita, Ata, Mina, Abel, Shaibu, thank you all for joining. Juliana, yeah, thank you for the introduction in the chat. So as Dr. Priscilla rightly mentioned, so we are here to exchange knowledge, ideas, to try to understand what happened at the 56th session of the Subsidiary Body of the UNFCCC and thereabout. So one of the things that we thought we should begin with for this webinar is to give a very brief background of what the global gender and climate change advocacy is even all about before we get into what African women presented as their demands for COP27 at the SBI 56. So on that note, I will welcome John Baki, who is the Deputy Executive Director with WEP Nigeria, to please give us a very short background to what the whole talk about gender and climate change and their advocacy, where we are, what we are pushing for going forward, and what have you. So thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Zainab. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone you are from. Thank you for this opportunity to make a presentation on the brief background to global gender and climate change advocacy. As some of you may be aware already, climate change has become one of the global environmental challenges that is confronting humanity. And that is why there is hardly any event at national, regional, or global that we convene without a mention of climate change. There has been a consistent rise in global temperatures that is causing catastrophic climatic events around the world. The flooding, hurricanes, and other climatic events are causing loss of livelihoods and increasing gender inequalities. The world took a decision in 1992 at the World Conference on Environment and Development in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, that there was a need to have an intergovernmental treaty to address the challenge of climate change. And in 1994, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that was developed after the Rio conference came into force. So the parties to this convention meet annually to take stock of efforts by different countries to address climate change. So within this convention, there are different agreements that are entered into among parties to address.
Where it was not estimated, we have put.
John, could you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meet every year to take actions to address climate change. So within the convention, there are different agreements that are made among the parties in order to address climate change. And one of those agreements, which is the latest, is the Paris Agreement, which has the aim to limit global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, below 2 degrees Celsius. Apart from the Paris Agreement, there are other agreements like other agreements that the parties have entered into, like the Kyoto Protocol and other agreements that all aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, parties have come to realize that the impacts of climate change are not uniform. Different reports published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other bodies under the convention have confirmed how these impacts are not uniform. The reports have revealed how some population groups, due to their biological makeup and social roles, as well as physical ability, are more vulnerable to climate change impacts than others. There's also a revelation on how developing nations are more vulnerable than developed nations because of their low capacity in terms of resources and technology to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Even with this realization, efforts to address the gaps seem to be very slow by the parties. And this has made the vulnerable populations and vulnerable nations continue to be hit by the impact of climate change. And because of this slow pace that the parties have progressed in addressing the impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations and regions, many groups started making demands, rigorous demands on the parties on what to do to address this climate change impact. And one of such groups is the Women and Gender Constituency, one of the 9 major groups of UNFCCC. So at every conference of parties to UNFCCC, different groups are there to influence discussions to ensure that the discussions produce outcomes that we address particular needs of specific population groups. So ahead of the conference of parties to the UNFCCC that is to hold in Egypt this year on the African continent, the African Feminist Task Force, which is a part of the Women and Gender Constituency, have put together a set of demands of what they want to see in the outcome of COP27. So this same set of demands were presented at the just concluded 56 sessions of the Subsidiary Bodies for Implementation that held in Bonn. The SBI, or the Subsidiary Bodies for Implementation, hold their sessions just before the conference of parties meet every year. So it's like a preparatory meeting for the COP. So at the SBI, the African women made some demands on the parties, and these demands are summarized here. So there was a demand for more inclusion of women and young people as national delegates to engage meaningfully in the UNFCCC COP process, because from the data available to us, the composition of national delegations to UNFCCC official meetings have been lopsided. The representation has more men than women from most of the countries. So that is one of the demands that women are pushing, that countries should ensure there's a fair representation of women and men. The women also demanded that there should be a just and equitable transition from fossil fuels for all. There was a request that targeted multidimensional approach to support the poorest and most vulnerable African communities through investments in clean energy at large scale to create jobs, raise GDP, and cut greenhouse gas emissions. Around climate finance, there was a demand for provision of adequate, accessible, and human rights-centered climate finance as a matter of justice and equity. On agriculture, women demanded expansion of access, control of, and decision-making regarding land ownership, productive resources and flexible funding for enhanced agricultural production and food. As you are aware, agricultural sector is one of the sectors where women are engaged more in developing regions like Africa. Groups, the women's group also demanded for national climate learning strategies that are gender transformative and recognize the importance of new leadership by prioritizing civic engagement, green skills, rights, life skills, policy processes, and activism, and ensure that girls and young women are meaningfully engaged in the development of these strategies. On mitigation and strategy, the African Feminist Task Force demanded for technological developments related to climate change that should incorporate and enhance indigenous and women-specific knowledge, priorities, needs, and roles in the development of new technologies. This was in recognition of the role indigenous knowledge is playing in climate change mitigation and adaptation. There was also a demand for developed countries to commit to immediately halt all new investments in fossil fuels and nuclear energy with a clear and urgent phase out or shift from a fossil fuel-based economy to an economy based on genuine, sustainable, and gender-responsive use of renewable energy. So the question now, or the questions are, did the demands of African women considered in the outcome of the SBI 56, whether or not they were considered, what will be the implication for the outcome of COP27? How will other groups join this advocacy to push for these demands? These and more are some of the questions that will be answered in this webinar. So I hand back the floor to Zainab to let in our speakers so that they can give us the highlight of what happened at SBI 56 and what's the implication of this on COP27. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, John, for that concise presentation. I'm sure it made our participants more aware of what we're here for and what transpired during the SB 56 that was recently concluded. So I think it's time now to bring speakers on to have that interaction, an interactive session, and also where there'll be opportunities for question and answers for those of us on the call. And then I just want, for those of us that were not here early, we have 3 speakers lined up for today. We have Dr. Priscilla Achakpa, the founder and global lead for WEP. We have Zoneziwoh Mbondgulo-Wondieh, the executive director for Women for a Change. And we also have Syvia Diamon Dobor, a climate change practitioner from Liberia that should be joining us hopefully before while the conversation is going on. And so I'd like our speakers to just introduce themselves with maybe 1 or 2 liners, just so that our participants are more familiar with them before we dive into the conversation. So over to you, Dr. Priscilla and Zoneziwoh, while we wait for Syvia.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening once again. My name is Priscilla Achakpa. I'm the global lead for Women Environmental Program and also one of the speakers here. And of course, at the UNFCCC, and particularly in Bonn, I was one of the negotiators for gender on behalf of Nigeria. Thank you. So that is my introduction.
Thank you. Over to you, Zoneziwoh.
Hi, everyone. Good day. So I'm called Zoneziwoh and happy to be joining you all. I work with Women for a Change as well as co-convener for a feminist movement, a sub-regional feminist movement called Gen Egalité et Caste. So I am also one of the members for the African Feminist Task Force. And I was also in Bonn, where I was part of the delegation for the Women Gender Constituency. So it's good to be here with you all, and I really look forward to having this conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoneziwoh and Dr. Priscilla. So I think before we, and I'll just also quickly introduce myself. I'm Zainab Yunusa, and I'm with the Young Professionals in Policy and Development called UPAD, a small network in Nigeria. And I also work with Plan International as a youth movements and campaigns coordinator. And I happen to also be a member of the Women and Gender Constituency and part of the people that volunteered for the African Feminist Task Force. And thank you all once again for joining. So, and then to our speakers, we've received this very brief, concise overview of what transpired at the SB 56, thanks to John from the presentation that John made. So our participants also have an idea of what today's conversation is about. So, but I thought it would be great to start with hearing from our two speakers on really their thoughts around the outcomes of the SBs. We know that there were several topics discussed. We know on different themes, whether it is on, sorry, I just had to mute the speaker, whether it is on agriculture, whether it is on just transition demands, the aspect of climate finance. There were also discussions around mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. Those are very wide topics, and definitely an hour or 45 minutes will not even be enough to discuss those. So for the sake of this conversation, we're going to focus mainly on two of them, which is on loss and damage and on gender and climate change. That means gender-related outcomes and demands and recommendations. So we're going to be talking on loss and damage and gender. So, and I know that the speaker that was mainly supposed to speak on loss and damage is actually Syvia. We're still hoping Syvia manages to join us before the end of the conversation. But while we're waiting for Syvia, then I'll just throw the question to Dr. Priscilla and Zoneziwoh. So, and this is now focusing especially on gender. Could you just probably give us for a couple of minutes, what are your personal reflections on the outcome of the SBI 56 in relation to gender and climate change, in relation to the gender and climate change discussions that you witnessed at Bonn? What are your personal reflections from the negotiations, from the conversations, from some of the advocacy side events? And please, I'm throwing this open, whether Dr. Priscilla can start and then Zoneziwoh follow, or either way.
Okay, thank you very much, Zainab. And let me just start by saying that from me, and in fact, indeed, the African continent, and of course, Nigeria, we were very disappointed that we could not really get a position that we will be able to take to Egypt to, as a negotiating text, because the essence of the SBI was to develop technical technical papers or issues or positions that when it gets to Egypt, we will be able to kind of finalize and approve. Unfortunately, we were unable to get a position at Bonn during the SBI 56 because we had two positions and two drafts which were taken to Egypt, which is as good as not taking anything. And in Egypt, we're supposed to have just 2 sessions, which is just 2 days. So how do we arrive at the final conclusions or decisions when we get to Egypt? That is a worrisome thing for us, because we strongly believe that if we were in Bonn for 2 whole weeks and we were not able to arrive at a decision, what is the possibility that when we get to Egypt, we'll be able to arrive at it? And the major things that forestall everything had to do with the issues of climate financing. For us in Africa, we strongly believe in climate financing, because we cannot have a gender action plan which a lot of things are embedded in it. And then we don't have the finance to be able to implement that. One of the things that we, the Gender Action Plan advocated for was the establishment of the national focal points. This national focal point, at least most of the countries that are parties to the UNFCCC have been able to appoint or establish the national gender focal point. But it's just not enough to have a gender focal points. How are you empowering the gender focal points to be able to situate herself and of course carry out the assignment that has been given to her? We have 5 thematic areas in the Gender Action Plan, and these 5 thematic areas means a lot. And at the end of the day, they're supposed to report to the UNFCCC that these are the actions that have been done. But at the same time, they are supposed to network with the grassroots, with the various MDs and all other segments of stakeholders in the country. Now, if there is nothing about finance, how will they carry out their duties? Or is this just enough to establish a gender national focal point and leave it at that? But apart from the national gender focal point, for us in Africa, we strongly believe that Africa contributes least, at least not up to not up to 4% of the greenhouse gas emissions to the global warming. And then everything, the bulk of the challenges is on women. So if we don't have to do a little things, like the capacities, carry out communications, try to understand what the impact of climate change is to them, then how do we move forward? So for us, for me as a particular, when I was negotiating on behalf of Nigeria, that was one of the critical areas that I was focusing on, because we need finance. We can have so much problem, we can have so much plans, but if we don't have the plans, if we don't have the means of implementation, we are planning in abstract. For us,
thank you so much, Madam Priscilla. I think some people now have an idea of what, I like how you were able to explain in very simple terms of what transpired in Bonn, what you felt were, how you feel personally, and also in your position as a negotiator on behalf of Nigeria.
Okay.
And so my takeaway is that, please put yourself on mute, please. Thank you. It gets a bit distracting. So my takeaway, and I think as with some of our participants, is that there was no concrete position on the draft that will then be continued at COP27, and it's kind of it will stall whatever conversation that we'll have in Egypt at COP27, considering the time frame that we'll have, which is 2 days. And for you, it was comments around climate finance, which you think is part of what stalled this. And then let me then move over to Zonzi. So Dr. Priscilla has mentioned climate finance, how she thinks, arriving at two draft texts is the same as not even arriving at any at all, because it's like we didn't make any progress. So what do you also think are your reflections around these points too, or beyond climate finance? Do you think there was something else that you think was holding the negotiators back towards arriving at a sole conclusion, speaking from your African feminist perspective, or as an African woman? Over to you, Zoneziwoh.
Thank you so much. I strongly concur with what Dr. Priscilla said. I mean, some of the sessions, in the hall, and it was so difficult to really come to understand that you will have, 20, 30 gender focal persons in a room, and they are unable to agree on very, very simple issues regarding, just basic human rights issues regarding, agency, regarding access to services and so on. And I want to say that personally, my personal impression about the general gender informal meetings was a bit, sad. The fact that most gender focal persons from the sub-region where I come from CEMAC, were actually not present, and that alone does not really align with the gender action plan, one of the priority area where it talks about participation, leadership, and also access or knowledge sharing. The fact that the gender focal persons were not there, that's already a barrier. And I think it concur with what Dr. Priscilla already shared around, finance. And when I asked about why were some of them not able to come, and why were, like some of the country delegations sending just two, one of the challenge which they shared most were around finance and so on. And I think that also was captured during some of the informal meetings where they really emphasized around the need for investment in participation to meetings like this, and the need for capacity building, and also the need for a clear monitoring in terms of progress on how far countries have been able to implement the gender action plan. And I will also want to emphasize on the point that in as much as the gender action plan was agreed in 2019, some of the countries, which was very disappointing to find that some of the countries like Rwanda so far could not see a focal person for Rwanda, which I think it's a progressive country in quote, but it was sad to see that they have actually developed a national action plan on adaptation and other focus areas around the climate discussion. But in terms of gender, very few countries have actually developed a national action plan in that light, which was a bit unsatisfactory, given that we are all talking about the need. They all agreed to mainstream gender and bring in that gender lens in terms of how they address crisis, the climate crisis, but then they have not been able to put together a plan of action, which I would say, in as much as it is a setback, but then it is an opportunity for activists within the continent to really pick on that, to have conversations with their different ministries of environment, be it environment, climate, or adaptation, to see that there is need for domestication of the gender action plan, and there is need also for meaningful engagement of their different gender focal contacts in all these spaces, because they cannot prioritize a male participant over a female participant. So there is definitely need for an inclusive engagement at all levels. And I think it's an opportunity for us, given that the COP is taking place on the African continent, and this may take again another 6 years for the COP to come back to the continent. So this is a very, very huge opportunity for us to make sure that by the time we're going to COP in November, we really have pressured, our different governments to really sit up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zonzi. Thank you for even beyond answering the question. You've already gone into some of what would have been responses for the next segment or the next angle of our discussion. So thank you for already proactively answering some of that in terms of what women can do to be part of this advocacy. But just before we get there, I know we said the essence of this webinar, we're going to focus on gender and climate change, and then we're also going to focus on loss and damage. Unfortunately, Syvia has not joined us yet. I was informed that she's in transit, and probably because of network connection, she's not able to make it. So, but just before we move forward, I wonder if maybe perhaps you, Zonzi, or Dr. Priscilla have anything to add in terms of loss and damage, and it could be its interlinkage with even the gender advocacy that we're already discussing of how this means, what is the impact of loss and damage, perhaps how it disproportionately affects women. What do we even mean when we're talking about loss and damage? Why should it be an important agenda item in the COP27 discussions? And how did we even fare with negotiations around loss and damage at the SB 56, perhaps around a loss and damage facility? You understand what I'm saying? So probably you can just touch very lightly on loss and damage And sorry to put you on the spot. I know this wasn't yours to speak on. So please, Zonzi or Dr. Priscilla,
Okay.
very shortly.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Today, one of the things that I saw that gladdened my heart was the letter from the outgoing Executive Secretary of UNFCCC. Loss and damage has never been on the agenda of the G77 for discussion. And so today, I mean, part of the things that was done, which the G77 and including Africa put forward, that it must be on the agenda, one of the items for agenda discussion in Egypt was the issues of loss and damage. And this was presented to the Executive Secretary and her team. And we saw a letter today that this has been approved, that is going to be an agenda item that will be discussed in Egypt. So for me, that is the starting point, and I feel really happy that we have this approval that this issue is going to be discussed in Egypt. Now, what is loss and damage? And why are we really focusing on loss and damage? And why is this critical to the gender question? For us, when you look at what is happening environmentally, and that give an example, a typical example of Nigeria, where I come from. For instance, we have the issues of the climate-induced conflict, which is affecting most of the women in this region. For instance, in the Southwest, I mean, in the Northeast, where we have the child, which was a source of livelihood for most of the countries, including Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger. Now that the Chad has dried up and people are made to move, and the people are moving, it is the women and the children that are the receiving end. So the impact of climate change is mostly on women. But how do we address this? How do we address losses that have been incurred as a result of climate change? Nobody has really been focusing much on that. And so for us, for me, for us as an organization, and for the African Women's Task Force, which is what we are taking forward to Egypt, is one of the critical things that we are going to be addressing. We have rivers that have dried up. What is happening? Women cannot go to farm, and we have a lot of conflict-induced, climate, which nobody is addressing it. Then we have, for instance, in the South, in the South, where we have the industries that have polluted the land. And the women from the South in Nigeria cannot farm. They cannot do anything. How do we address those issues? The impact is more on the women. How do we address those issues? So for us, that is where we're looking at the issues of this loss that has occurred, the damage that has occurred to women. Who is going to pay for it? And that is where the issues of climate finance also come in very strongly. Because if we have, industries that have destroyed and have degraded our environment, and they are not saying anything about it, then it is time for us to take it up. Most of our children cannot go to school today because of the issues of climate-induced conflict from all parts of Nigeria. You go to the Southwest, you have sea level rise. You go to the South, you have the land degraded by the impact of oil industries. And then you come from the far north, you have the issues of desert encroachment and the drying up of rivers. All these issues are critical issues that are affecting the gender component. How do we address this? So for us, for me, and for us as African Feminist Task Group, that is a critical issue that we cannot ignore. So we're very happy that as we're going to COP to Egypt, these are issues that we must strongly take forward and make sure that the issues of financing loss and damage is really a core issue for discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Priscilla. So I'm just being cautious of our time here. I'd put in the chat that if you maybe have any questions or comment, feel free to put in chat. I'll read it out before we get to the Q&A, where we'll have the opportunity to unmute ourselves and then also contribute quickly. But before we get to that, we just have one last aspect to touch on, and that is actually like the core of why we are here. So we're holding this kind of webinars to exchange knowledge, information, ideas, like we're already doing, but also more importantly, strategies, and see, okay, what can we do here? Because I believe that those of us that are on this webinar are here because in as much as we want to learn, get to understand what we also know what role can we play. And I can see there are a lot of women here, from even from the introduction, people that are obviously passionate about gender, climate change, climate finance, what have you, and they want to know what, okay, COP27 is happening in Egypt. What role can we play, we as women? Most of us work with NGOs, we have advocacy, we have maybe influencing strategies. We want to know how can we inculcate this into the work that we're already doing, and if you're not doing it already, what exactly can we do to be part of this? I know we've already made mention of the African Feminist Task Force. We've already made mention of women and gender constituency. We know WEP here is the one hosting this. So I'm sure some of us here want to know how we can be part of this advocacy. And I'm going to throw that open to Zonzi as well. And Dr. Priscilla. Zonzi, maybe starting with you. What would you think? You already started answering this earlier on what you think people can do in their countries at individual level, as organization, as national delegate members or thereabouts. So maybe you can just touch on that very quickly, being conscious of our time also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, but before on that, let me just add to what Dr. Priscilla already shared around loss and damage. So in addition, also we have, cultural sites that are being degraded and, that are being exploited by all these, in quote unquote, we will say development actors. And for instance, let's say you in Cameroon, there is this park somewhere in the southwest region. I can't remember the name, but then it was being, fell down just because of some development partners who wanted to exploit the land to plant palms. So those are some of the lost and damaged conversations that we need to really bring, on the table and really, ask very hard questions and calling for an end for such exploitations. Now, to respond to the question which you asked, for sure, there are multiple ways to really engage in the space, and there are a lot of webinars like this that will be coming up and which will be led, by African women. You have WEP here, you have the monthly webinar, which is also being conveyed by WGT. And these are all spaces that we can all engage to share knowledge and also learn from others who have been in the space for a while and see how we can domesticate some of the action. But just in terms of quick, what to do from now, I would suggest that for those who have not yet had the opportunity to engage with their different gender focal contacts in their country, this is the time for you to engage and really understand what is happening at the national level. What is the conversation? What are the government doing? What are the ministry in terms of leading climate conversation doing? So this is an opportunity for you to start engaging in that. And also for sure, connect with other movements, groups that are already leading conversation in this light. So these are just some multiple ways of you to really engage in terms of keeping the momentum and carrying the conversation forward. And to note that you must not be an expert on climate issues, because this is a cross-cutting issue. Climate change is, a human right issue, an economic issue, so it's also a health issue. So you must not really necessarily say, oh no, that is not my field, because when you look at the impact of climate change, it affects everyone, irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your status, irrespective of your field. So for sure, it is a human right issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Priscilla, do you have perhaps more to add before we move on to the questions?
Yes, Zone has already spoken very brilliantly about how we can engage. But for us as an organization, we see it, for instance, the actions that you take in your community, the little things that you do in your community helps to amplify the work that you are doing. But how do you engage your leaders, your government, from the local government to the state government to the federal government? These things are key. And then how do you amplify the voices of the people, especially the indigenous people, the indigenous women? How do you amplify their voices? Can we begin to profile what we are doing in terms of like a small documentary to show that this is the impact of climate change and use that as an advocacy tool to our government? I saw that one of my sisters asked a question about action-oriented research, which is very important because when you are advocating for something, you must come with evidence-based. And so are we doing enough when it comes to the issues of evidence-based to be able to engage our government or to engage these other stakeholders? Can we, in our own small ways, wherever we are, begin to document the kind of things that we're doing so that we'll be able to showcase it, that this is how climate change impact. But above all, we have this African Feminist Task Group. Everybody is welcome to kind of contribute, to kind of join and contribute your voices. What do you see as African feminists to be able to do to amplify the little work that you are doing in your community and even take it to the global level? These are things that we need to do. But above all, when we are talking about getting our issues into the negotiations, we must start at the national level. Are we ready to engage at the national level and get our leaders to be able to integrate these issues that we're discussing into the Nigerian position, for instance, the African Group of Negotiations position, or the ECOWAS or the regional bodies position, so that by the time it gets to Egypt, we now have our issues implemented or integrated in almost all of these areas. Each and every one have a responsibility, and that responsibility begins now. If you are not doing it before, it is important for us that we begin to do it now. Thank you, Zainab.
Thank you so much. I lost connection for a moment, but I did certain that you did mention maybe perhaps the African Feminist Task Force, the Women and Gender Constituency, and also advocacy at individual level government. But thank you. I'm sure that will prove useful. And I see that you already answered the question that we have in the chat. So for our participants, feel free. This is the moment for you to raise your hand. If you have very brief comment, or if you have questions or clarifications, please just use the raise hand icon so that I can then pick you. Please don't unmute yourself. Let's try and so that we can take as many people as we can before the time goes off. We have about 7 minutes left. So I can see Gertrude. Gertrude's hand is raised. Gertrude, please, you can unmute yourself and make your contribution. After that, we go to Irene.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and all colleagues that are on this call. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I just wanted to make a rejoinder to the presentation that Dr. Priscilla has made, that we should also think broad while we engage with COP27, that we should also try to permeate every area. For instance, we are looking at loss and damage, at finance. All these are interconnected, for instance. Adaptation, mitigation, because the failure to mitigate today is the adaptation of tomorrow. What I wanted to bring up again is the response measures. Response measures mean the impacts resulting from implementation of policies to address climate change by parties to the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. I think we are all agreed on that point. And quickly, response measures work plan lacks a clear linkage to support the marginalized and vulnerable members of local communities, who are usually women. So it should have a clear linkage to receiving real support, such as funds, technology, skills, So what I'm saying is that when we are planning our advocacy at COP27, we should see that we incorporate, this is a starting point. This is our strategy, and I think we should incorporate gender, our African feminist demands in all, we should make them weave through other areas that we are going to be addressing at COP27. Thank you very much. I hope I've made myself clear. I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Gertrude. That's actually you contributed about strategy, how we should try and link our demands to any of these already existing demands, and also the thematic areas, because that's one strategy to get finance, and we've already mentioned that finance is at the core of any of our implementation. So thank you very much for that valuable contribution. So I'll have Irene go now, and then we have Comrade Martins, Aaron, and then Foucault. Thank you. Irene. Irene, you may have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Perhaps you're already speaking. You have to unmute, and then let's have your contribution. In case you're struggling with that, then I'll just move over to Comrade Martins. Please unmute yourself for your contribution.
Okay, very good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Go on. Thank you.
It's a pleasure being here. And of course, I've been listening to discussions and opinions and all of that. I am very happy that this webinar is holding this afternoon. So I want to say thank you to the organizers, and of course, bringing like minds together to do the discussion this very good day. While loss and damage, climate financing are discussions that actually Africans, especially the developing nations, are actually negotiating to see how they have a way with that. Excuse me. I want to remind us the fact that climate change loss and damage is actually a negotiation that refers to the consequences of climate change that go beyond what people can adapt to. And of course, when options exist, but a community of people like us should also look at, like what the two, Dr. Priscilla actually said from the beginning, strikes me that negotiations, even at the global level, at that high point of a meeting, actually failed to achieve result. My question is that when this negotiation for loss and damage, reward system, and the rest of them, climate financing fails, what other options do we have? What do we do as a people back home in Nigeria? What do we do? The obvious reality remains that climate change is impacting on the different people, especially women. Maybe I should also say that apart from, I work for Christian Aid actually, and I am also a climate change researcher, currently doing my PhD in climate change communication, actually, development communication with specialty in climate change communication. I want us to look at what we can do as a people while we take this discussion to the global level of COP27 back home. We should also have another alternative. What do we do for the people to mitigate the impact of the reality before us? Can we also begin to look at what we can do with available options, which we can actually also provide? Working through around communities in the North Central and the Northwest especially, I noticed that while the people may not have, community, farmers especially, may not have a particular name or a strategy for what they are doing to mitigate the impact, there are options that exist back here. Can we begin to explore them? Isn't it possible that while we wait for those discussions at the global level, looking for how we can actually have the developed nations who are contributing immensely to climate change, while Africans, especially the sub-Saharan, carry out and are facing the brunt of the climate change, what do we have on the table? Can't we do something in that light to see how we can actually help our people in the interim? Is it possible? And
Okay,
if it's
thank you,
possible, yes, thank
Comrade
you.
Martins. My apologies, I'll have to interrupt because we're running way over time. And I just want to apologize to everyone that is here. In less than 10 more minutes, we're going to round up everything. So please, if you can stay back, we'd really appreciate that, just to take more questions and a conversation. So I'll just have Zoneziwoh and Dr. Priscilla note that question down, and they'll just touch on it in their final closing thoughts. So Irene, are you able to unmute yourself now for your contribution? In case you're still struggling with that, please go ahead and put it in the chat. So I'll move over to Anne and then Foku, and then we'll be done.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks a lot to Dr. Priscilla and to Zoneziwoh for their interventions. Very interesting. Thank you so much for organizing this meeting and allowing me also to participate and ask a question. I've heard Dr. Priscilla saying that the loss and damage agenda point is now on the agenda of COP27. I wasn't aware. My question is very simple. Do we have the precise semantic of how this has been integrated into the agenda? So a very simple and straightforward question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne, for making that very straightforward. So I'm sure that is being noted down. So we have Foku. My apologies if I'm not getting the right pronunciation.
Good day to everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you to the panelists for the very insightful presentations. And I also want to thank Dr. Priscilla for the presentation and the impacts she mentioned about the fact that most adolescents in Nigeria are facing, like, they miss out schools. And those problems are similar to the problem that adolescents and especially adolescent girls face in Cameroon due to the impacts they have of climate changes. Like, adolescent girls in particularly can't manage well their menstruation and menstrual periods due to lack of availability of clean water. They cannot take care of their menstrual hygiene during those periods of time due to impacts of climate changes. And I wish to emphasize on the fact that more of these spaces should be created and make sure that adolescents, especially girls, can have influence and access in those spaces, because as well as women are affected by climate changes, adolescent girls are also facing the same issues due to climate changes. And like, it is mostly when they reach adulthood that they are trying to be included in these spaces, but I think that is already late for them to be integrated in such spaces. And spaces like this should be adolescent girls inclusive at the young stage, not waiting at the late stages. For example, like the COP27, we should look into ways to make sure that adolescents and especially girls should be included in the decision making and the solution bridging processes to make sure that the decisions are inclusive and responsive to the problem also faced by adolescents. Thank you very much, and once more, good day to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Foku, for that contribution. And I think that's a very valid contribution. I also resonate with that, being someone that works with Plan International, that is very keen on making sure that the voices of girls are put out there in these conversations, you know. And I think your point is also very valid. And this is also some questions that come up when you're trying to push conversation around child's rights. There's also an agenda on the SB 56 and also COP in general, which is Action for Climate Empowerment. And this is the one that actually deals on young people's participation, also in terms of education, in terms of leadership, in terms of representation. And I think your recommendation or question is core to the point of including young adolescent girls. But we also have to bear in mind, how can we include them meaningfully? Is it going to be meaningful enough to have an adolescent girl join some of these COP conversations when maybe without prior knowledge, training, capacity building in different aspects before it gets to actual negotiation process, which needs intense research and experience? So those are some of the things we can do. So Irene, I will attempt to unmute you. I see that you mentioned you're struggling with unmuting. So I have sent you a request to unmute. Unfortunately, if that is not working, we'll have to just move on to the closing session. So have our speakers respond. Okay, I think that is still not working. Please just put your contribution in the chat. It's also valuable. So I'll just quickly move to Zonzi and Dr. Priscilla now. Please, we have just 5 minutes and we really need to end in 5 minutes. So very briefly to some of the questions and also your closing comments. In 2 minutes, please, each person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zainab, and for all the questions to Comrade Martins, to Amber, and to the rest of the questions. First and foremost, Comrade Martins, you talked about why we negotiate globally, the actions that we do at the local level matters a lot. I think that we should be looking at issues that can address the strategies that we can build the capacities of communities. For instance, WEP is involved in the issues of agroecology, which I strongly believe that these are issues that can address the issues of climate change, adaptation strategies that we need to address these issues. So the actions that we take at the at the local level, building the capacities of the farmers, for instance, to understand that there is the need for them, and then communicating climate change to them in the language that they understand, because most of the climate change language, the terminologies are somehow the things that people don't understand. So unpacking the language of climate change for them to understand is also something that we need to engage the various communities that are kind of experiencing climate change, for them to look at the strategies that they'll be able to adapt or implement to address this impact of climate change. And one of them is about organic farming, which WEP is very much involved in, but also we have the National Gender Action Plan on Climate Change, which has about 5 thematic areas. How do we use that National Gender Action Plan to be able to implement at the subnational level and at the community level? These are issues that we can take on board. The letter came under the matters relating to finance. That is what I have seen, because I think that the COP, what I read there, will be included in the provisional agendas of COP27 and CMA4 under their respective item entitled matters relating to finance. So those are the areas that this one's come. But by and large, every action that each and every one of us take at the community level is an aggregate of what will happen at the national and at the global level. So each and every one of us is encouraged to work with the communities at the local level to be able to elicit information and as well as build their capacity on how they understand what climate change is and how they can adapt to it and implement strategies that will help them build their resilience and their livelihoods. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Priscilla. And I think that is relevant to Irene's question in the chat about coming up with data that speaks to how much women need for loss and damage, focusing on climate finance, which is already the agenda item that's loss and damage comes as a sub-agenda item. So I move over to Zonzi. Zonzi, please, in 2 minutes. Probably there are some questions you also want to respond and touch on and also close your contributions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Doc has said most of the things, and she really put it in a very, very nice and comprehensive way. But I would just add that it's important that take a look at the gender action plan and see some of the key actions there, because the gender action plan definitely talks about, I think this responds to what Comrade had asked around communication. So that's one of the priority where, it talks about how do they communicate, the lessons, the progress. And in as much as it talks also about communication, there is also that element of knowledge sharing, coherence, and monitoring. So I would advise that it's an important tool. We should not just let it be like one of those check boxes that the UN does, but rather kind of use it to hold both the UN and parties accountable in terms of respecting and integrating approach towards how they address issues related to climate crisis. So I would encourage that we use that. It's a very key tool to use. And I think someone had asked, how does it also connect, with other instruments? I would say that I like someone who has, extensive experience working in the space of the CSW. I think there is interrelation. You can bring in the Beijing Declaration also in the climate conversation. One of the critical points for the Beijing also was around, environmental sustainability and climate justice. So they are all interrelated, and this tomorrow will be the 1-year anniversary for the Generation Equality, which one of the Action Coalition focused on feminist climate justice. So you see, all these instruments are somewhat interrelated, and we can always build on that to hold our different officials and parties accountable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zonzi. That was very informative and also insightful, and also very concrete response to how people can be involved and how all of these tools we can use it for accountability, and also holding some of our parties that have committed to these actions responsible, and also as a strategy tools for our own advocacy work at local, national level, which is the essence of this webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for our participants that were patient. We ran 11 minutes over time, but you're still very patient with us. Thank you to the organizers, WEP. Thank you to our speakers, Zoneziwoh, Dr. Priscilla, Syvia, that was not able to join, but we're glad that we were able to touch on loss and damage and gender and climate, which were the core topics of this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Zainab. You didn't give us the opportunity to tell you thank you, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, my sister from Cameroon, and thank you for all that joined and have made this a fruitful discussion. It's a discussion that we must continue to have. So this is just one of the series. We're going to have more series going forward.
Okay.
Thank you, WEP, for hosting us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Mishi.
Hi. I don't know who was calling me.
Hi, John.
Yeah, I was greeting.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. This was really informative. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Minan, how are you?